I get so much joy off of watching people come to this company and grow. I throw a lot of money into resources that other people wouldn't to help people to grow, right? I think like those kind of things, because you can't change where you get joy from. A lot of people in our boat, they get joy out of watching the number get bigger, right? They get joy out of that business class flight, that first class flight. They get joy in taking those pictures on Instagram and showing people that shit. They get joy out of those Inc. 500 lists and those Inc. 5000 lists. Like, honestly, bro, like we've been on Inc. 5000 like 6-7 years in a row. I don't even think I tweeted it this year. Check that box 7 times. That box has been checked. And I'm starting to talk a little bit about, you got to know what boxes you're trying to check. You got to know what boxes you're trying to check, or otherwise you'll always be kind of rudderless.
Corey Blake and Josh Steinley here had a fantastic conversation with somebody that both of us look up to a lot, Wil Reynolds, who is the founder and director of strategy at Seer Interactive. He has worked across every vertical in digital marketing, including pharmaceuticals and hospital systems to e-commerce and software as a service. Over 15 years of experience doing and talking about search, that's search engine optimization. He loves to speak at conferences about the future of search and tends to lead the agency that he works at to think about search through different lenses. He started Seer Interactive in 2002, so just a few years after you started MWI. As a one-man operation out of his living room, today is Seer. It's home to over 150 employees. He told us, I think they're about to 200.
Yeah, he said 200.
Across Philadelphia and San Diego. In his free time, Wil hangs out with his wife, Nora, sons Rio and Nico, and pup Coltrane. He also serves Philadelphia's homeless and runaway youth at Covenant House, where he participates in a yearly sleep out, which we spoke about. If you're in the world of digital marketing, and then I'll get even more specific, search engine optimization, you know who Wil Reynolds is. Or if you don't, you definitely should. He is an insanely smart marketer, a very, very savvy as it comes to business intelligence and using data and analytics in order to optimize your website or your business's online performance or online presence for peak performance. But he's also just a super cool entrepreneur with a great backstory and a really smart, selfless, kind, service-oriented, cool guy who has had some amazing stories to tell. I personally, it was one of my favorite conversations that we've had.
Yeah, I mean, I feel like I say this with every episode, but I was listening to that and I was thinking about it during the episode. I was like, man, this is like the best one ever. Like, this is so good. It's so valuable. And maybe that's because I know Wil and because we both have a digital marketing agency, so we can really relate to that. But it was the personal stuff. It was, I mean, the stuff like how he found all his executive team through volunteering opportunities.
Volunteerism. We talked a lot about that. Yeah.
Yeah. And just things like that. And I mean, he really gave me stuff to think about where I was like, I don't know, maybe I need to change my whole philosophy about a few things when it comes to business.
Yeah. I don't say it lightly. I'm not just saying it to stroke his ego here. He's the gold standard in my mind as far as digital marketing agency owners is concerned. And also, if you're just interested in company culture and how to build a company that's employee centric and selfless as it pertains to building a company that is not just about you and your own personal journey and growth and look how much money I've got and look how big I'm, like, he really cares about his people. He really cares about his community. And he seems to have his priorities in line. You know, we really praised him on that. And he was like, look, you don't see all the warts and stuff of what it is like on the day-to-day naturally. But he also gave us a really big compliment, which I definitely took to heart. And it meant a lot because he's done thousands of interviews. And he just said, look, nobody's ever gotten to the root of who I am and why I've done what I've done like you guys did today. So yeah, you'll really enjoy this conversation.
Now, we have to put in a little disclaimer.
Yeah. So typically our episodes are, as it comes to language, are pretty clean and vanilla. In this case, Wil is...
he uses a lot of colorful metaphors.
Uses a lot of colorful language, which is so authentic to who he is. I feel like it would do a real disservice to edit it a ton. We'll edit it a little bit just because we know that a lot of the people that listen to this haven't heard a lot of language. And so we don't want you to be listening in the car with your whole family. And then all of a sudden Wil comes on and speaks his truth a little bit. But it really, honestly,
yeah, I don't know if we really can do much editing, but yeah, put on the headphones or make sure you're alone. Don't play this at work. Don't play it around the kids. But we felt like we kind of had to leave it in, not just because of the technical difficulty of editing it all out, but you would lose the sense of who Wil is and how, and the feeling that it would be distracting. I think it would be more distracting to edit it than it is to leave it in.
So listen to it. Great conversation, but be warned, there's a little more language in this than we've seen in the past. So please enjoy this fantastic conversation that we had with Wil Reynolds.
Something is happening in our world.
Time is very precious.
I'm going to show you how great I am.
Hope in the face of difficulty.
More than machinery, we need humanity.
Hope in the face of uncertainty.
I'm better now than I was. I'm experienced now.
Changing the world can happen anywhere, and anyone can do it.
The audacity of hope.
This is the Hope Strategy Podcast with Corey Blake and Josh Steinley.
So Wil, I want to say first, and you just complimented Josh on his book organization. I want to say you are an inspiration to so many people out there. I'm going to start fresh off the top with stroking your ego here, but you're somebody that I bet you're an inspiration and a mentor to so many people in our world, in the entrepreneurial world, in the digital marketing world, in the SEO world, in the paid marketing, whatever. And so many that you don't even know about, right? Like myself, who's been from starting working with Josh in 2013, not knowing anything about digital marketing, not knowing anything about this landscape, but being an entrepreneur who saw an opportunity and saying, oh, I think this SEO thing's onto something. I think, some people even in 2013, they're saying this thing's dead. But the research I'm doing, I'm seeing this isn't going anywhere, right? Like there's a lot of opportunity here. So I found you quickly. Josh probably very early on said, hey, follow this guy, listen to what he's saying. So just behind the scenes, myself or my co-CEO at MWI, Curtis, shout out to him. He's a huge Wil Reynolds fan. He's always coming up on Slack and saying, hey, read this tweet by Wil Reynolds. Look at this video he just posted. So I just want to say genuinely and sincerely, I've never done this before on the podcast, but thank you for the intent in which you put high quality, valuable content out there selflessly in a way that has benefited MWI, our agency, me as an entrepreneur and as an agency owner. It has benefited us tremendously. So just a huge thank you right off the top.
No, man, I appreciate that. I'm as much of a teacher as I am a student. I think, so I'm always like just trying to continue to learn, push myself to learn. And then when and I'm trying to share stuff that I think other people won't. I mean, honestly, I think what value am I going to provide if I'm just like crushed it again this month?
Well, that leads into what I want to have the bulk of the conversation be about today. And as I was I've followed you for a long time, but as I was doing more research on you these last couple of days, I came across multiple things, videos you had put out, talks that you've given, talking about hard things and how in entrepreneurship, the hard stuff isn't talked about enough. And one of the things I told Josh early on is that I've always wanted to kind of have a podcast, or one of the things I am always fascinated about when I'm networking and talking to other entrepreneurs is the human side of entrepreneurship, because so often all we hear is the success stories. And you had given in a video I watched the story of Will.i.am, who had just done an interview with the founder of LinkedIn, and he went on this interview, this podcast, and he was just like, "Oh, look at all these sick projects I'm doing. We're doing this project with this," and then like a week later, you see an article come out where he's talking about how for months at a time he wasn't even able to pay employees at a lot of his startups and how they were really struggling. And you had made the point, like, this is the real stuff. This is the stuff where we're going to learn and grow and make progress, and good things are going to come from this if we talk about this. So there's a couple things I want to get into on that, but I kind of want that to be the premise of what we're talking about, is the hard, what good comes from the hard stuff, and how do we overcome tribulations and trials in entrepreneurship and life and business, whatever, in order to find hope and optimism and kind of keep pushing forward. So all of that being said, is kind of an overall synopsis. Tell us about your upbringing. That's something I haven't heard a ton about, but where are you from? What was your upbringing like? And maybe some of those lessons learned early on that have created the tenacious, optimistic entrepreneur that you are today.
I think my mom and dad are like the perfect like DNA combination to produce me. 'Cause my dad grew up on welfare, met his dad like 10 times his whole life kind of thing. He had like 3 brothers by 3 different fathers. 2 of them died of drug overdoses. His mom died of cirrhosis of the liver. So, my dad had that like really bad inner city upbringing, right?
Is he from Philly too?
He's from Philly.
Okay.
But he was a hustler, right? And it's interesting how that word has become this like thing that's kind of like not a good thing. The people who say that are people who aren't happy with where they are and they don't want to own the fact that like they could be where they want to be or they could try, but they don't want to. It's easier to tweet that like, oh, hustle culture. It's like, you know what? Say that to some black dudes in the hood trying to make their way out. Like that's the only thing you got is your own back. You got to work your ass off. So I'm like a diehard, like, yeah, I freaking hustle. It's been my blood. Like my dad today is still like out there shoveling people's sidewalks at 76 years old for $25. My dad doesn't need $25. He just doesn't know how to sit still. Like he's got to keep his hands going because what he learned early on is if I sit around and don't keep myself busy, bad things start to happen around me and to my family. So I think that upbringing and like, having my dad bring home like government cheese because he's just like a cheap bastard, right? And like being like, yo, I went back to my uncle, my Uncle Clarence's house, and like my dad would come back with like government cheese. I'm like, Dad, I'm not eating this crap. Like this is disgusting. Like you got a job, mom's got a job. Like why are you bringing this stuff back? But he's like, people eat this. Like people are given this as like their way of eating. And I was like, damn, So I think that there's a humility for me that just comes from like having a parent that like grew up on welfare, like. And didn't come from much. My mom, on the other side, is like super refined, like never went to college or none of that stuff. But like if you met her, you'd be like, damn, like you would never know that, right? Because she was the one that's like, so it's interesting. One thing that people really don't get, I think people don't broadly get about being young and black especially, but it's like, I think it's black, but it's also not poor, but like lower middle class, is my mom was real big on like, you never are going to use a salad fork to eat your meal. Because somewhere out there in this world, you're going to be sitting down at a dinner and somebody's going to judge you and think you don't know the difference. So in my house, you always eat your meal with the right fork. You don't turn it over. Like you don't do the things that people might look at you someday and think, oh, he doesn't know any better. Whereas my dad, like, oh my God, the guy's a savage. Like he'll just eat with like, he'll bust out his like pocket knife and cut open a steak. You're like, Dad, it's like a $50 ribeye, dude. Like I'll go get you a knife, dog. So I feel like, that combination, right? It's this refinement part of my mom. She's super freaking articulate, great memory, yada, yada, yada.
What was her upbringing? Was her upbringing similar to your dad?
No, my mom's upbringing was totally different. She was like a young girl mover and shaker, just kind of like, but like not like an entrepreneur mover and shaker like that. It was more like moved to New York on her own at 18 from Georgia. Like figured out a way, lived in Harlem, like lived that life for a little while. My mom's like 6'1", so she's like, this like tall person that can kind of own a room. She has a very deep voice. So that was her. But no, she had like more of what I would consider to be like more of a normal upbringing than my dad did.
So did your dad talk about that? Was that part of kind of the story you heard growing up? Did he teach from these life lessons that he learned growing up? Was it something that was part of the family culture to be talked about, and appreciation and humility and all those things? Or? No. My dad's a flosser. I mean, my dad grew up in the hood. So my dad's like, yo, you go buy a new Cadillac, like you driving through the hood with that, like you letting people know you got something, right? So no, not at all. Like my dad's a flosser. Like to the death. Like he always got his gold on, his jewelry, like, like that's just how he grew up, right? That's why I'm glad I didn't get that part of him. I'm glad I got my mom's side on that, right? I see that gold chain under that hoodie.
Yeah, right. So no, I'm glad about that. But no, that's that. It wasn't talked about because it was just your reality. Like when that's your reality, it's nothing else. It was just, that's how he grew up. But a lot of that stuff I didn't find out until much later because there were times where I would be pressing my dad as I became older, my early 20s. You're like, yo, Dad, like you need to like stop talking that way, like blah, 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 blah. And it was my dad being like, you know why I talk that way? Like, here's why. And you're like, like, Dad, why are you doing a shot of vodka at like 11 o'clock in the morning on a freaking Saturday? He's like, have you ever seen me miss work? Nope. It's like, well, then leave me alone. Like, let me show you how I grew up. And then you're like, oh. So I started giving my dad a lot more latitude and realizing, you know what it was for me? It was realizing how far he came. Yeah, that's the thing, right? Because in the world that I live in, if like I got my friends over and my dad comes over, like, yeah, boy, where's the liquor cabinet? My friends are like, yo, like we all get down, but like we don't get down at like 11 o'clock in the morning. But from where my dad's coming from, he's made it. Like all the other people, right, that did those exact same things, like they did not make it. They did not hold on to their jobs. They did not grow in their jobs and yada, yada, yada. So I started in my mid-20s realizing that sometimes you have to judge people on how far they've come, not on where they are, you know?
So how did your dad make it? Like what?
Somebody got, you know what, man? Like somebody kept their eye out for him. You know, I haven't talked to him a lot about it, but there were just a few people in his life that, you know, checked in on him because they knew his mom wasn't shit. They knew his dad wasn't shit. You know, his mom misspelled his name on his paperwork when he was signing up for the military. So his name that his government name now is not his actual name he was born with, but he was trying so hard to get out of the hood that he was like, you know, whatever my mom wrote, whatever you guys type up, I'll just take it. Right. Because he was like, I got to get out of here. I got to get out of this like life that's around me. And I think it was a few people that took the time and saw that he was trying to do the right thing. And they said, you know what, let me take this kid under my wing and make sure that he ends up, you know, getting out of this area.
And how did your parents meet? And like, how did they, I mean, they sound like opposites. Was it a opposites attract type of thing? Or like, how did they make this work?
I think it was. And, you know, my big thing is I've been having some interesting conversations around, you know, getting your company to a certain point and what that means, and yada, 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 with some of my advisors. And it's like my biggest box to check, I always tell everybody, is I want to make my mom proud. Like, you know, it's not having like, is my mom any more proud of me running a business that's 100 million versus, you know, 30 million? Like, probably not, right? So for me, like my mom went through a lot of shit. My dad had a tough upbringing. So what was normal to my dad is not normal.
Yeah.
Right. And my mom put up with a lot of shit to keep the family together. So for me, it was definitely opposites attract. And they probably should have never been together. Right. Like my mom would have had a better life if she wasn't with my dad. Like, and that's real. You know, my mom would have had a much better life if she wasn't with my dad for most of his life. Because he constantly it wasn't like struggling with addiction in the sense of like, my dad was addicted to alcohol and like couldn't do his job. No, like my dad always worked, everything. He was completely functioning. But, you know, rage up sometimes, you know, like get mad, get angry, get pissed off about small shit. And, you know, and seeing that as a kid, it was hard. And you would be like, I gotta make sure this woman who is toughed it out with this guy. And I love my dad to death. See him all the time. Saw my mom and dad this weekend, right? Just yesterday. So it's not about me not loving my dad. It's about me accepting where my dad is. But really, I get up and I try to make my mom proud every day. Like that's it. Because like I'm too selfish to do what she did. I would have been out. I would have left. I mean, I wouldn't have put up with that.
That is so powerful, man. That hit me. That empathy and you see that sometimes it's more dramatic, you know, sometimes it's like my dad grew up in the hood. He had all these things that he struggled with. And other times it's maybe less dramatic in somebody else's personal situation. But there is that relationship with your parents where, or anybody, but really just talking about parents in this case, where you're kind of trying to hold them to this standard of where you are and what you've learned and all these things. But it's like, no, why don't we just appreciate the growth and what they've done and everything they contributed and where they are now versus where they were before, and judging people based off of that merit instead of, well, I'm here, why aren't they here yet? You know, well, everybody's where they're coming from is different. Whether it's, that's crazy too. That hit me when you said that he took the name they gave him just so that he was just looking for a way out. Like
his mom was wasted.
That you're that. Yeah. That's incredible. Did you have other mentors growing up? Were there any, so when you were growing up, you had your parents, you know, looking up to and the hustle and the grit and stuff. Did you have any other people around you that kind of did take you under their wing, or people that you were looking at and saying, hey, that's somebody I want to follow in their footsteps?
You know, I had people give me their hand-me-down computers. You know, this woman, Miss Mary Hood, she gave us our first computer. And that's, you know, I was maybe 11, 12. Commodore 64 was earlier than that. So I was probably like 9 or 10. And my parents put it in my room. So, you know, they weren't like coming over being like, yo, here's how to use this thing. Right.
Yeah, you had to figure it out.
But they're like, yo, like, we just bought a new one. We don't know what we're going to do with this old one here. We'll give it to you guys. And, you know, I think that's been the thing that kind of put me on my trajectory. I really didn't have any real mentors until I started until I started Sear, where like I had people that were like, yo, like, let me tell you how things work. But growing up, my mom was hardcore about education and all that kind of stuff. So
we're going to talk about Sear and the company that you've built and the success that you've seen. But before that, what jobs did you have leading up to starting Sear? And I feel like a lot of the entrepreneurs that I talk to, had other jobs, and there was something about it. They're like, I got to do this on my own. I want to be my own boss. I want to make the rules. I don't like the way they're doing that. I'm going to do it my way and switch it up. I mean, what were some of those things, that kind of jobs that you had maybe that led you to say, I'm doing this on my own and I'm going to do it how I want to do it?
So like one thing I want to be clear about is like, that's not my story. Like I would have been more than happy to have built Sear in somebody else's company. I never wanted to start a business. It was never something I wanted to do. I've always been entrepreneurial. So like when I delivered newspapers when I was a kid, and like my mom on Sundays, like I have really bad circulation in my fingers and toes. So I get numb real quick, and I had to deliver paper in the winter on my bike. And like my mom would be the person to get up and like drive me around if it was so cold. My parents were like, get up, you got a job. Like get up, get out, you have a job. Like we're not driving you around, like that's what I love about my parents, man. Like they were like, it's your money. Like, why am I going to get in the car and get out in the cold and drive you around because it's cold out? Like, oh, it snowed. Tough shit. Like, get on your bike, kid. Well, they haven't shoveled yet. Tough shit. Get on your bike. Like, that's your money. Like it's not my job to give you pocket change to go buy video games. But there were times where my mom would be like, it's too cold out. Like, so like I'll drive you around. I'll make sure there's some hot chocolate out there for you, Yeah. So I had a paper route when I was a kid, and I was always that dude that got great tips because I always cared about my customers, knew them, and like it's interesting. Like I was always like just well tipped, and I would always like time myself to see how quickly I could deliver and trying to optimize my route and what streets I go down. And that was at 12 years old. I just thought that way. Then all throughout college, I worked at Staples for a while, selling computers. I was doing like stocking shelves. And I was like, wait, I built my own computer. By the time I was 14, I had started building my own computers. So I'm like, well, can I work in the computer department? And they were like, nope. I'm like, but the guy selling computers doesn't know anything about computers. Like, I built these things. They're like, nope. So what I did is I would watch people buy computers. And I was like 14 years old, and I would like do my job, like stocking shelves, but then I would always hang out in the computer area. And then when people bought computers, I'd be like, yo, here's my card. Like, if you want, I can come over to your house and hook it up for you. So I was getting people out the back door because Staples wouldn't let me do it and sell computers. So then I also had a couple warehouse jobs, and then I went into college. And then I went to college, I got a job, right? And I was doing telemarketing. Like, it sucked, I had to ride my bike in the rain to get there, but I always had a job. Like, my parents were like, no, like, you're always going to have a job, like some way, shape or form. And part of my college career, I worked in an Amazon warehouse, and the thing when I worked I love the fact that I worked in warehouses a couple different times in my career, because a lot of people talk about, oh, well, Amazon treats their people this way or that way. It's like, have you ever worked in a warehouse? You know what it's like to work with warehouse people? Right? Like, oh, no, you don't know. You read an article. It's like, I've worked with these people. Like, some of these folks are going to complain about something no matter what. Like, you could drop the temperature and make it cool, and then they're going to complain about the speed of the line. And then you slow down the speed of the line and blah, 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 right? I saw people sleeping in between, back in the day, because I was working at Amazon warehouse in 98. I saw people sleeping in between books. Like, you literally would see somebody sleeping in between bookshelves. And you're just like, but yet that person, when it came time for break, they were always up. They were always the last person back in on the shift. And you're just like, you know what I'm saying? Like, you can always find 3 people in any place to complain, which is something I've also learned a lot about. But most people complain about how Amazon works. They sit at a desk all day. And the motherfuckers haven't had a job in a warehouse in their lives. They want to read an article and tell people how bad it is there. It's like, well, you know what? Wasn't that bad. I worked there. Like, it was helpful. And I learned a lot, right? I learned a lot by not being around people like me. Right? College kid, like when this is somebody's real job versus it's a college kid job, you think about it differently, So then I did that, but I went to school to be a teacher. So that's why I was like, I never thought I would start a business.
What was that transition then? How did it happen?
So I love technology. And when I tried to like put my grades, so I was student teaching 1998, 99, maybe it was 99.
So you got your degree in teaching then?
Yeah. I didn't, and I still have one class left to take. Yeah, I had 3 credits left. I had to take Stat 2. Okay. And I was like, I got what I needed out of college.
Did you want to teach high school?
Yeah, I was teaching high school. So I did my student teaching, and I was like doing things like emailing parents, like certain types of reports that I had auto-generated. And I had I was using Excel to calculate grades instead of a calculator, basic shit, like using like the stock market game. Back then, kids could really trade stocks with real companies in like fake stock accounts with like Yahoo and whatnot. Whereas like teachers had like board games where you like spin the wheel. And I was like, well, that's whack. Like I'm working with kids who are hearing about like lower middle income kids who are hearing about guys dropping out of college, becoming billionaires. Like I want them to go home and learn about that stuff. And like, I would also print out my news from the USA Today, and my teacher would be like, you need to read the paper. The kids need to see that you read the newspaper. I'm like, it's the same news, Ruth. Like, it's the same news. And I was like, you know what? I'm a little too early for my love of technology to get into teaching. And then that's what led me to a career in search instead, because I was always like a wannabe athlete. So I love the competition, love the numbers. And then that led me into finding, and I love computers. And I've always loved being on computers and talking to people. Like when I was 12 and I was on Prodigy and I would jump into like the hip hop versus metal chat rooms. Like I loved that shit, right? I just loved talking to people and connecting with people. So I've always kind of been that way. And that's what led me to my first job in search.
I've heard you say before, I heard in a video or something, or I read, I can't remember where, but you said that one of your superpowers is that you're insanely competitive, but also can be completely content with where you're at. Mm-hmm. So you've got kind of this push and pull of like, look, I'm content. I'm here. I'm grateful for what I've got. And you can practice that gratitude, but you're also, like you just said, you're competitive. You're kind of looking at that next thing. Walk me through that. Like from where did that come from? And how do you use that as a superpower in your day to day?
I like to win. Like I like to win at shit. I like beating people at stuff, and I like getting beat. Like I like the feeling of getting beat at something because there's no excuses, man. They scored more points than you. Like, go home and learn, So my parents had a fireplace and there was a chimney. And like, I would spend, cause my dad was like never around really because he was always working. So I would just like take a tennis ball and practice strengthening my arm by throwing against the chimney. Man, once in a while I'd hit the house. Woo, man, my parents would tear my ass up. They'd be like, yo, you hit that house again, boy. You break that window, I got to work another 10 hours to like fix that. But I was always that kind of person that just loved like getting better every day, like, and knowing that was within my control to some extent. Right. So I just loved that. So there's that super competitive part about me. I love winning. I love losing. I love all of it. I love scoreboard. I love like, got you. Right. And I love when somebody's like to me, like, yo, I got you. And you're like, all right, I got to get better next time. Right. So I've always loved that part. But then I think, the thing that drove me to start Seer was a lot of it was around my volunteer work. And, I like to kind of get off the court, so to speak, and get out of that competitive mindset. And you realize like, oh my God, I'm working in a children's hospital where somebody can't take their child home. Like, and this was when I was in my early 20s. I was volunteering at the children's hospital. I was like 23. And you're like, damn, like there's another world out there other than just that 9 to 5, 9 to 10, whatever hours you're working, that kind of mentality where you're like, I'm going to run this shit. I'm going to optimize this stuff. I'm going to own this. I'm going to win. It's like, there is that. But then there's a world out there where that don't even matter. Somebody just wants to bring home their baby, right? Somebody's concerned about the health of their child or their loved one. And I've always kind of had those two parts of me running at full speed. So I can fully be engaged and like, yo, let's go at this keyword. I'm gonna kick your ass or you're gonna kick mine, but somebody's gonna win. We ain't both gonna end up in the number one spot. And then I can turn that off and instantly flip into a mentality of like, what am I doing for the people in my community? And go at that with the same vigor and effort and hustle and push that I would when it comes to the business.
That perspective is everything, right? How do you look for that when you're building your team? I mean, I know I've met some of the people. I've met, Larry and talked, by the way, so impressed with him. We were talking about that potential hire. And then I was like, man, I like this guy. And I was like, hey, can I ask you a few more questions? Because I was kind of in the thick of it on my day and I had like a bunch of stuff going. So we ended up talking for like 45 minutes or an hour or something. And he was so kind just to answer some questions. And then I was helping him with some sales questions and commission questions. We kind of had it was awesome, by the way. But so how do you look for that? That's so hard to find somebody that has that. Because I know what you're talking about. I'm competitive exactly the same way. I love winning. I love losing. Literally exactly. I remember going in the backyard as a little kid with a tennis ball or a baseball. And we lived my dad was in the Air Force. We lived in an apartment complexes on base. Oh, awesome. So, and I remember going in the back and like picking which square I needed to hit with that ball, and I would throw it over and over and over and over. And I just had, how many times can I hit it in a row? How many times did I hit it yesterday? How many times can I hit it today? Like, and just, the ball coming back to you. Oh man, you're making me.
You know what I love though? I'll tell you about that. I love knowing I'm not good enough. Most people cannot deal with that reality, and that makes us different. Like, yeah, I now know, like, I was okay. Like, so one of my coaches was a professional baseball player when I was playing baseball. And like, I was good enough to make the team. And then like one day he's like, Will, you cannot hit the curveball. So he like spends like all this time with me in the cages. Right. And at the end of it, you could tell he's like, you're not the best place for me to put my time. And then 3 other kids got drafted that year. And one kid got drafted first round, 2 other kids got drafted third round on my team. And you're like, right, because he went and put the time into the kids who had the chance. And it was okay for me to not be good enough, right, to get that attention in that time. And I think that people aren't good with that. Like, people look in the mirror and they're not where they want to be, and they start looking at everybody else as the reason why they're not where they are, and they're the last person they look at. Whereas I was taught something in, like, we had a speaker come when I was in the 5th grade, and he's like, every time you point your finger at somebody else, there's 3 more fingers pointing back at you. So spend 3 times as long looking at yourself before you ever go out looking at somebody else as the problem. And that always stuck with me. So I spend a lot more time looking at myself and what's within my control before I go out and look at things that are wrong with other people.
Man, I played baseball too, and I couldn't hit the curve either, and I have the exact same experience. I was laughing at you said that, like, that was my weakness.
I pulled my neck up
and center field all day.
Me too. I was a center fielder. I could throw the ball deep. Like, I could throw the ball deep, but in terms of my bat was shit.
I'm the same way. My dad's gonna listen to this, and he's laughing right now because he's like, that bat sucked.
Yeah, the bat was not good. But you had another question. Sorry, what was it?
Well, I want to know, how do you find that? I mean, I've taken that kind of that competitiveness, and I've built a career that started in sales and then went into, obviously, now building a company and business development, and that's much bigger than just sales. But it's hard to find those people that are tenacious like that have that competitive drive, but at the same time can have that perspective and gratitude. And so how do you find that? What do you do when you're looking for those people? I know your guys' hiring process is rigorous. How do you find those people and get them in your circle and watch them thrive?
So the first thing is I have no pressure to grow. Right? Like, if I don't grow, that's okay. What I'm not going to do is wake up and work with a bunch of motherfuckers who I don't want to work with. So if I don't grow, that's okay. Right? It's the beauty of owning the business, like 100%. Like, nobody says I got to grow. Who? Like, it's so funny how our default is, well, you have to. No, I don't. So I think the thing I learned early on is we spent, oh my God, dude. So early Sear, like, I didn't want it to be over 10 people. So I came into Sear with the mentality of, I'm keeping this thing super small. Never realized that our reputation would get so big that, like, I would just be turning away millions of dollars. Literally, I think over a course of like 2 or 3 years to keep us under 10-ish people, I just referred all the business out to my friends. Like, oh, here, take this job, take this project, take this project. So when I really decided to start growing, I knew we could do it because I was turning all that business away. So that's one of the reasons why, for me, like, when people first started at Sear, part of their offer letter, in order to accept an offer at Sear, you had to sign on to volunteer somewhere for 3 months, and you had to write down what that place was on your offer letter. So I attracted a different type of motherfucker from the beginning, right? Because I was like, yo, if you don't want to spend any time, so when people would hesitate in interviews, I'd be like, yo, if you could spend any time volunteering anywhere, where would you? And people would sit there and spend like a good 2 or 3 minutes thinking about it. I was like, you ain't never thought about that?
Trying to think,
I don't want to work
the right answer.
I don't want to work with you, right? I don't care how good you are. I don't want to work with you because you've never taken the time to stop and pause and think. Like, yeah, if I had the time, like, here's a place that I would put more time into. Never? Like, so for me, I there's no pressure to grow. There's no pressure to grow. And I think that's the beauty, because then there's no pressure for me to hire people who I don't want to work with, right? And there's no pressure for me to keep people who I don't want to work with. And I think a lot of that pressure comes from like, well, I have to grow. Well, said who? That's the most freeing thing out there.
So if you could go back in time then and have this conversation with yourself, I mean, I know it sounds like the mindset was the same, but so many people that are starting businesses, all they think and talk about is growth. We have to grow. This month has to be bigger than last month, and last month has to be bigger. You know, is that just is that teachable? Is that trainable? Is that something? Is there some things you can put into practice to get to a place where you can say, "I'm comfortable not growing"? I mean, that's such a hard balance, right? That's a very fine line to walk because you've got to be able to do what you're doing or say what you're saying and act like you're acting, saying, I'm good, not growing, I'm content. But then at the same time, you've got to put in the work, because the fact of the matter is you have to grow. If you don't grow, if you don't close that deal, if you don't bring in that business, you're not going to exist. So that's
not true. That's not true, because if you hold on to your clients, right? If you got 10 clients and you're holding on to your if you got 10 people and 20 clients, let's just say, and you're not losing clients, right? Like, we used to do shit for our clients back when we were small. Like, we would all get in my car when we could all fit in my car and drive to every client and drop off a gift to them as a whole company, right? Like, we used to make the phone ring at everybody's desk up until we were 25 people. Why? Because the people dialing in pay our checks. How can you not want to answer the phone? How can you think that's somebody else's job? Oh, the person who pays us? I don't want to talk to them. I don't want to be on the front lines picking up the phone. So I think I just kind of instilled in people just a different style of working. And I have so many people that have been with me for so long that just is kind of in the DNA to get at a certain level of leadership. And then once you're in that level of leadership, they know how I treated them. So therefore, it usually just kind of flows down. Now, we have our times where people go off the rails a bit and we're like, that's not how we do things. And then they got to move on, or we got to train them, but I don't think you really train people on how to be a good person. Like, I think you either are or you aren't.
How big is Seer right now? How many people do you guys have?
I think we're like 200.
So what's your role like now as founder of Seer, leadership role at Seer? What does that look like with 200 employees?
It's a bad time to ask me that, because I'm interim running our analytics division.
You're looking for the replacement. I know that, right?
Yeah. So, but again, like, I'd rather hold it down than to hire somebody I don't want to work with, right? Because I'm also like ridiculously generous in terms of, our bonus structures and stuff like that. So like, I'm not trying to give that to somebody I don't want to work with, right? So I think broadly, before I had to take over the division, my job is mostly my ideal job is to work on innovation, like try to find things that no one else is doing that makes sense in the marketplace. So when people see it, they're like, that just makes sense. Like, why haven't I ever seen that before? I don't know, right? I love that. I love doing that. So I spend my time on that. I love sitting down with people who are really succeeding at Seer, right? Like, I love sitting with people and grabbing coffee, from interns all the way through. Like, I love sitting down and be like, no, how can I help you to put the right things on your resume? Like, what things should I be keeping in mind about you that you're trying to work towards and whatnot? I love that part of my job. Love it. Because I'm a teacher at heart, right? Like, I'm not a business guy who has to grow, right? I'm a teacher, right? And teaching is always about like, okay, kids came into my classroom with a certain set of skills. My job is to help them move on with more skills for their next thing. So I've always kind of come into it from a place of that teaching place. And then the other thing that I love to do that I've been doing is it's innovation, spending time with my team, and evangelism. I like being like, yo, world, there's a different way to do this shit. Like, whether it's running the business or whether it's, joining PPC and SEO data, like, whatever it is, I like being able to have a platform to go out and say like, hey, there might be a different way than what's the status quo.
So how has this transition been for you going remote this year, not having the opportunity to go grab coffee, or sit down in the office with the intern that's killing it, or, the hire? What has that transition been like for you? Is it something you guys are going to continue down the road of remote employees? Is it something you're going to go back to as soon as possible, or where are you at with that?
I think anybody who tries to go back to the old way is a moron, because I'm in the talent business. I'm addicted to talent. And the reason why I started doing remote years ago is I wanted my alumni back. So what was happening is we didn't have a remote policy, but I kept hiring people that I used to work with because we had unfinished business to do together, right? And I knew who they were. I knew what was in their hearts. And I was like, man, I'd love to work with that person again. Like, because we were just great together, right? So then I started hiring alumni, but they were all remote. And then Crystal was like, who runs the business? She was like, Will, we got to have a policy around this. So otherwise people are going to be like, what the hell? Will keeps just picking up alumni and letting them work remote. What about everybody else? So we started living into that. When we got our second office, we started living into that. Like, people weren't around me anymore that I loved to work with. I had interns in San Diego. I also had interns in Philly. Like, if I just became the guy that went out and grabbed coffee, quote unquote, then I'd be missing out on a lot of people. So I also flew out to San Diego a lot. I would live out there for months and months at the time so I could get to know my team members to the best that I could. My remote team members, I've like flown into Chicago before and been like, yo, before you guys want to meet me at a restaurant, like I got a long layover. Like, let's get together. Let's try to plan those things out. So I find my own way to keep that going. But from a cultural standpoint, for me sitting in this office by myself for the last 9 months, personally, zero effect. Zero. Because like I've always had a good amount of my day is spent on the screen trying to talk to different people in my company. And like, it lets me just focus in and lock in, like, which is what I like to do. I like to get in the zone, focus in, there's no distractions to my left or right. So it's improved my focus. Now I miss people being around, but I used to sit here with my headphones on, listening to some gangster ass music and trying to win. So usually it's like, I'm not just here like, hey, high-fiving people through the office. I've not really ever been that dude. Like I am if I see you walking from meeting to meeting, but like, I know that doesn't scale. Like, so so all of a sudden my other team members don't get that side of me because they're remote. So I've started getting much better at incorporating things that are more remote friendly in my day to day. And we're going to go back as a remote first company. So all the conference rooms are basically for one person only. We're going to re-architect them. We're going to be like, there's no two people in a conference room ever again. Like never. Because what that means is somebody somewhere is going to be having part of a conversation and they maybe can't hear right. Or maybe like, that room doesn't sound as good. Or they don't want to interrupt the flow because those two people seem to be getting each other. And I don't want that anymore. So therefore we're going to go remote first across the board.
That's an interesting observation because we've been remote first the whole time when we got going, when Josh, not the whole time since MWI has been in existence, but since Josh and I partnered up in 2013, one of the early conversations was, let's get talent for this. Let's find the best talent and not put boundaries on that. Let's not put geographic boundaries on that because we have the internet. Why would we do that? Right. So but we do have kind of a hub in Phoenix where naturally we have more people there because that's where I'm at. That's where Curtis is at. That's where more of the team is at. And it has been over the years, it hasn't been a problem for a while, but there was a little time when we had a lot of remote employees across the country that are sitting in their house and then they're calling into the co-working space that we use in Phoenix and they're sitting there talking and they're missing out on that interpersonal back and forth when you're sitting there staring and you see two people kind of laughing and talking about it. And so it had a kind of psychological effect on people sometimes like, man, I need to get out there more.
One of my team members said something to me that I never thought of before. And she said, when you're in a room and the room is booked back to back and you're remote and you can feel the meeting's not over, but everybody's got to hurry up and get out because somebody else is coming in. And you kind of get the feeling that the team then gets together, like right outside the door and keeps the conversation going for 2 or 3 more minutes. And she's like, I always felt like I was missing out on that 3 minutes after the meeting. And I was like, oh shit, facts. Like I can see that. I can feel how that would feel. To feel like, damn, every time that meeting has a back-to-back meeting and that room's got to get cleared out. I know they're still talking on their way from room to room or back to their desks. And I never got that part of it. And I was like, okay, all the more reason for us to change the way we're going to be.
Yeah, that's true. That is very true. When the Zoom meeting ends and it goes black and you're just sitting there by yourself in your room again, you're not having that small talk after, or even just the, man, that was a great meeting. I'm super excited about this. Hey, what are you doing this weekend? Like those little things that happen that just kind of keep that morale up and keep the culture high. I couldn't agree more. I want to talk about Covenant House and the work that you've done specifically with that program. And so the Covenant House is and I'm going to butcher it a little bit, but you can help me fill it in here. But it is a nonprofit organization that works with homeless children mainly, right? Teenagers, and it works with youth. Okay. So you're talking everything from abandoned children, abandoned youth, homeless youth, trafficked youth that are now the project is to put them up, give them purpose and help them transition out of homelessness into life, right? And then find a future. So you've been involved for a long time with this organization. You also have your annual sleep out that I always look forward to seeing. I think it's around Thanksgiving time, right? Or is it Thanksgiving that you do it? Talk to me about Covenant House. Talk to me about the purpose of that whole organization and your role there and what you've done with them.
Sure. God bless the dead. One of my boys, Kurt, he got me involved with the Young Professionals Board back when I was a young professional. And I think that was 13 years ago or so. And I met a guy named Steve Grandizio when I was there, who then connected me to Larry, which was crazy. So I got Larry through volunteerism. Oh, wow. Right. I got Jeff, who was my man, Jeff on my sales team. Man, that dude, whew, volunteerism, like met him through Steve Grandizio. And Steve was just my mortgage broker, but he's like, yo, Will, I got some stuff that I got some people that I think you might want to know. And Steve, if you knew him, you'd be like, this guy is one of the best people on the planet. And so whenever he had a guy or a girl for me to chat with, he's like, well, this is a person you should meet. I always took those meetings, and 2 of them turned out to be my executives, right? So it's interesting, right? You think, oh, well, how'd you build this exec team? Volunteerism, right? I got Crystal off of Craigslist because I couldn't afford job postings, and now she runs the whole business. I got Larry and Jeff through volunteerism. I got Steve, my head of finance, because one of my fraternity brothers became a recruiter. And like this dude and I, we used to like just keep each other's, try to keep each other from falling over after parties. But it's funny. That led to me finding, so all my executives have come through, with the exception of one, I believe, have come through something that was like really kind of like luck or something through volunteering. So then they kind of have that spirit brought to them from the first place. So the Covenant House where I met Steve, here's a couple things. It's like, I like learning. I like learning, and I also like hearing individual people's stories. And, I didn't instantly mature on my 18th birthday. You guys probably didn't either, right? So our government has a cutoff for people to get government assistance. Oh, well, you're a child up until 18. But once you're 18, if you're still homeless, like, we don't have, that's not really our job, right? And you're like, you're gonna be an 18-year-old kid in like a shelter with a bunch of grown-ass men? Like, that's weird. So then where do those children go? Where did those youth go in between those times, where it's like you're 18, 19, 20, trying to figure life out, just like I was. So once I learned about that issue, and then I started doing the sleep outs. And when we do the sleep out, we get to spend a lot of time with kids, and we get to hear their stories. And you're like, yo, because you're gay, your parents kicked you out of the house in the winter with no jacket? Like, you're like, damn, like, okay, I gotta be a part. Like, that shouldn't be anybody's reality. And I think 40% of our youth are LGBTQ because parents don't know how to deal with that shit. So therefore they throw their kids out.
And just for clarity for anybody, so people listening, so the sleep out, you go to an area where there's a lot of homeless and you spend the night.
No, they won't do that. They won't do that with us. When we do the sleep out,
what do you do?
They're very concerned about our safety. They usually have us in a parking lot or something that's fenced in, and I don't know if they do it anymore. I don't think we have it anymore. But in the early days, when we used to sleep in a not so great part of the town, they had like a cop there because they did it with executives. So one of the things they wanted to do is have business leaders saying, I'm sleeping out, right?
Okay.
And as a result, in order to recruit those business leaders, it's like, people got to feel like they're safe. And people have different levels of what they consider safe. I'm like, dude, I walk around homeless people all day in the city. Like, I'm not afraid of them. Like, but for a lot of people that are coming out from the suburbs, they might be like, ooh, like I want to, but like, I got to feel like I'm going to be safe. I'm going to get home to my kids. It's like, you're going to get home to your kids. So no, we've slept at the shelter a few times in their parking lot. And now we have like a church that we sleep in the city. Okay. But there's something about vulnerability. I'll tell you, when we used to sleep at the shelter outside, one of the saddest things, Corey, was when a kid was teaching me how to set up my box in a way that I could still look out of the box. So I wasn't completely, because he's like, imagine if you hear footsteps and people walking around you and you can't see outside of the box you're in. So you want to make sure that you can see outside, but you don't want all the cold air coming in. And I'm sitting there listening to a 19-year-old giving me that, how to set it up. And I'm like, that is your 19-year-old experience. Like, like it didn't crush me in the sense of I was being part of trying to solve the problem, right? Like, if you just hear that and don't do anything about it, it might crush your soul. It crushed me for a second, but then I'm like, wait, Will, you're out here trying to do something about it, right? So double down on that. So hearing that story really kind of got me. And then over the years, just continuing to hear those stories. Then there's also stories of kids who were in the Covenant House and then went on to graduate college, and you hear both sides of it and you realize that they're at this inflection point where this organization is helping children through, or kids rather, or youth through that inflection point of going into adulthood. And it just means a lot to me to not make money in our company for the sake of our own selves, but it's also to try to support others within our community. So again, to get back to our volunteer roots, it's always been about that. Like, we give out, I don't even remember, man. I think it's like we give out $2,000 or $3,000 every month to the people at SEER who volunteered the most that year, or that month. So then their organization gets like $1,000 donation or whatever in that person's name because they spent the time volunteering somewhere. I think we've been doing that for like 6-7 years, man. So we've always been about that kind of thing, which I hope continues to help us to attract the quote unquote right kind of people.
Is there a temptation when you're out with these kids? And I mean, when you're talking to this 19-year-old kid and he's setting up the box for you or teaching you how to do it, are you like, dude, I got a business. I want to hire you. I want to bring you in. I want to adopt you. I mean, you've got the money, you've got the business and everything. It seems like there'd be this temptation to just be like, I want to take all these kids in and I'm going to help everybody. Like, how do you deal with that if that's a feeling you have?
I haven't been asked that. No, I don't feel that way. Partially, to be honest with you, like we've seen too many movies about like The Blind Side or whatever, like poor kid and then gets with the right family and then now he's like in the NFL. Like that shit ain't true. It don't happen like that. I've worked with more youth and been like, yo, I can set you up with an internship or something like that. Just like show up on this day. 80% of them show up late, don't show up, miss it, whatever. Right. So I don't romanticize. It's like, you got to meet people where they are, Josh, you know? And it's like, yo, you literally don't have any place to sleep. One time, a buddy of mine that I also met at the Covenant House, he had me go and talk to a bunch of guys at a group home. And I was like, dude, don't ever bring me back there again. I'm at the wrong phase of life for them. Like, don't have me come in with my entrepreneurial rah-rah. Like, if you literally are coming out of foster care where parents have been abusive to you and whatnot, like me talking to you about a rah-rah opportunity, it's like, really? Like it almost is like disingenuous, right? So yeah, a lot of times I'm like, I want to help fund the organizations that have the people who know how to help these kids get to the next step. I don't know how to get these kids to the next step. And I think sometimes I've overinvested. This has recently happened to me recently. Dude, it pissed me off. I had a kid. So after the George Floyd shit went down, I had a kid I've been talking to over the last year or so. He just lost his job, COVID, all that stuff. I'm like, yo, you got some web design skills, blah, 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 blah. He's like, yeah. I'm like, great. Why don't I connect you to this friend of mine's dad who's trying to start a business and he needs a website. This kid, mind you, had to move back home, no money, no job, no nothing. I hooked this kid up with a buddy of mine. Literally, I'm like, dude, see me on the emails. I'll help coach you, all that. If this kid followed through on anything he said he would do, you did, right? So then eventually after these people giving this kid a break, they were like, Will, like we've given this kid like 15 different breaks. Like he just continues to not see through the projects the way that he said he would. And then we can't get in touch with him for freaking days, right? So it's like, there's a lot more stories like that out there. And that's why I don't feel like I can come in and be like, let me bring these kids in, because it's like, I'm too far removed. Like not everybody just needs to be brought in. Like some people need to learn some tough lessons still out there on the streets. We've lost youth. Oh my God, that kills me. When you year over year are like, yo, what happened to so-and-so? They're like, yeah, he died of a drug overdose. He just couldn't beat his addiction. Or, oh, she's back with her pimp. And you're like, oh my God. So I think, Josh, a lot of times I am like, let me get money and awareness in the hands of the people who know how to deal with this issue. Because I definitely sure as hell don't have the right answers. And I would hate to try to set a kid up for success in what I see as success. And, even though I'm offering all my support to these youth, sometimes it doesn't always work out the way that like we want to make it sound to be. And then that can be very deflating for people who have rushed in like myself to help out. And then you find out the hard way that somebody just completely didn't follow through. It's almost more damaging. So I'm going back to one organization that I work with. And I'm like, you got to better filter the kids that get in front of me, because I'm going to try to help them. And if I connect them to people in my network, like this kid could be like the amount of people ask me for web design help that I don't even do web design. This kid could literally be running a 6-figure business right now if he had taken care of the first client I gave him. But instead, he's doing whatever he's doing, and that's tough. And I think it's a little too much infrastructure for me to try to think that you need around you to try to take a kid from a good kid who's trying to do the right thing to you can run your own business. I think that's a really big step. And I think I'm a little too early for some of those kids. Sorry for the rambling answer, but
I love that perspective of funding the people who can help them where they're at and with that stage. Because I've tried to do that too, where I've tried to teach people entrepreneurship who are in bad stages and then it doesn't work. And then 10 years later, I'm looking back and I'm like, they were trying to get off of fentanyl or something, like they were trying to struggle with an addiction. Like they didn't need me coming in and being like, here's how you set up a business. Like that was like 10 steps away for them. But at the time, like I didn't get that. And I love the experience and perspective that you had, because you've had a lot more opportunity to try to do that than I have.
To bring it full circle, right? It's like somebody met my dad where he was and realized that their job was just to get him out of the hood. It wasn't to teach him like, oh, you can run your own business someday and be your own blah, blah, blah. It was like, let me get this kid out of the hood. And you know what that led to? This guy, right?
Yeah.
Right? So, but if somebody had to come to my dad talking about start your own business, that might have not have hit as well as like, dude, just get in the Air Force, get your ass out of the hood, get around some people, get some discipline around you. And thank God somebody did, right? So it's like that, right? To bring it full circle, it's like, you got to meet people where they are, which is how I started off talking about even my relationship with my dad, right? Who I love to death. My parents are still married. But it's like, once I learned to meet my dad where he was, I realized how far he had come to get to that point versus the other kids in private school. When I would talk to their dads wouldn't say gangster ass shit like my dad would say around my friends. So it was embarrassing when I was a kid. But then when you realize like, well, yeah, their dads came from money, or their parents were like upper middle class, like their grandparents had money. That's how they got where they got, right? So it was like, all right, cool. I'm learning to accept people with where they are. And I think that's been a huge freeing thing for me in life.
Yeah, I love to meet them where they're at. That's such a good, when you're looking to serve, looking to help others, especially homeless people, or people that are really struggling with addiction or whatever that might be. There's a situation in our family where we're trying to support somebody that's kind of in some of these situations. And one of the things that I've said is that, look, I've seen this with my own mother. My own mom's a drug addict, alcoholic, and she's been gone since I was a kid. And I've tried to mend that relationship by taking 1 or 2 steps, only to be let down. And it came to me, and I realized she's taken 1,000 steps in one direction. And in order for me to even start to heal this process, I've got to figure out the time, energy, and, just tenacity to take those 1,000 steps and get there, and then take 1 step back and then another step back. And it's easy to think, oh, I've got things figured out. I'm going to go help this person. I'm going to bring them back. Like you said, that romanticized blindside story, right? But no, the truth be told, they took 1,000 steps in a direction, and in order to get back, it's going to take a lot more. So I like that mentality as well. Obviously that's not to say, well, I'm just going to sit back and relax and somebody else will take care of it. It's to say, well, no, there are processes and systems and that have been put in place and resources to use in order to help get there faster. And other people that are doing that and, dedicating their time. So to support those causes, I love that.
It's also not to say that there isn't hope. It's not like, hey, just because I can't move this kid from being a drug addict in the inner city to being an entrepreneur overnight doesn't mean that I'm giving up hope. It's just being realistic about the steps that you can take. It's actually very hopeful because you're saying, hey, if I can move them this little step, then maybe somebody else can move them the next step, and maybe somebody else can move them the next step. It's just, hope doesn't mean that you throw reality out the window, and confronting reality doesn't mean that you're giving up hope.
There's a thing called the Stockdale paradox, and it's in the book Good to Great. It's probably up on your top right shelf because it's red. So I imagine, Josh, it's one of those red books up there.
It's right there. Yep.
You know exactly where to go get it, brother. And, you think about it in the Stockdale paradox, one of the things they talk about is when people were in POW camps and they'd be like, okay, like we're going to get out by, Christmas. And then it's like, oh, we're going to get out by Easter. And actually, we're seeing it in the pandemic. Seriously, it's Stockdale paradox mentality. So people would die of a broken heart because they would keep building up this like vision of like, oh, I'm going to get out by this date. And it's like, you can never confuse like the brutal reality of where you are and still maintain hope. You can't be like, oh, I'm hoping for an end to this thing, because you're like, well, if you don't know that, or you can't control that, if you keep holding on to that, you're going to keep having your heart broken, which is eventually going to cause you to give up. Right. Whereas if, so you can't like let go of that. You have to always have that there, but you also must maintain hope that this situation is going to change at some point. May not be today, might not be Christmas, might not be Easter. I don't know when, but it's going to change at some point. So you have to keep that hope alongside of the brutal reality of the facts of the situation that you're currently in. And like in that part of the book, they talk a little bit about like, I think it was Auschwitz, and how like different people, they would watch people die sometimes days after them building up in their mind that this was going to be the day. And it's like, because the only thing they had going for them was putting that day out there, that day. And then once that day came and went, the weight of that, people literally just couldn't deal with it anymore, you know? And like in the Stockdale paradox where they talk about, I think his name is Jim Stockdale, who it kind of comes from. It's like how I've always thought about these things. It's like, you gotta be brutally honest about the facts. And that doesn't mean you lose hope. It's the same thing with like the pandemic for me. It's like, I never, like after like, you know, and we all thought like, or most people thought, oh, I'll be like 2 weeks out of the office and then we'll get back to whatever it is, right? Or I'll be a month. I literally never thought that. I said, this is going to go on forever. So I trained my mind within a week. Like, you know, you had your first like, oh, we'll shut down the office for a week. And then after that shit popped and I was like, I'm not doing that to myself again. I literally was like, this is going to go on for years. So if I put myself in the mentality of this is going to go on for years, I wasn't having that like, oh, come Christmas, it'll be. Oh, come Easter, it'll be. Oh, come this, it'll be. And you just keep breaking your heart over and over again. So I'm like, it'll be like this forever. So now I'm in the mentality of I'm going to sit in this room forever by myself with my wife and my dog, who's not here today. And that's how it's going to be for the next 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 years. And I'm going to find a way to win in those constraints, right? And then someday everybody's going to be back around and it'll be awesome. But it'll be a bonus the day it happens, not an expectation of the day on the calendar as to when it's going to happen.
We really appreciate you and your approach to, not just for taking the conversation today, but like I started with, just your approach to the whole game and the way that you do it is a really great example. Like Josh said, we oftentimes talk about how, you know, when MWI grows up, we want to be just like Sear.
No, you just don't see all the warts yet. I'll tell you.
I know we don't.
But seriously though, if you want, I would say if somebody said that to me, the first thing I would say is you're going to have to do some soul searching to find out what is your enough point. Like when is your point where you have enough? Because if you don't ever know when you have enough, whatever that is, right? Enough teams, enough clients, enough money, then you just keep growing all the time with no real reason to grow, which then can bring on pressure, resentment, and stress because all these things are happening. You're like, well, maybe that's not even what you necessarily would want, right? So for me, like figuring out what was good enough for me was very freeing, because for me, I wanted to pay off my house because I figured if I own my house outright, I can tell pretty much anybody anywhere. If I wake up tomorrow and don't want to do this, my house is owned. I don't have to make a certain amount of money, right? So that was my enough point, and I'm well past that now. But like, that was it for me. I wanted to get to a point where I could pay off my house and then tell everybody from that point forward, like, look, if I don't want to work doing what I'm doing, I don't have to. So then every day after that felt like a bonus. The other thing is, I think this is very hard to replicate. The amount of joy that I get off of watching people grow is off the charts. I mean, at the level that I'm at, like, and people would disagree with me all day on this, right? People would be like, well, he didn't care about me. It's like, all right, fine. You're one out of freaking 1,000 that I've worked with. But I get so much joy off of watching people come to this company and grow. I throw a lot of money into resources that other people wouldn't to help people to grow, right? I think like those kind of things, because you can't change where you get joy from. A lot of people in our boat, they get joy out of watching the number get bigger. Yeah. Right. They get joy out of that business class flight, that first class flight. They get joy in taking those pictures on Instagram and showing people that shit. They get joy out of those Inc. 500 lists and those Inc. 5000 lists. Like, honestly, bro, like we've been on Inc. 5000 like 6-7 years in a row. I don't even think I tweeted it this year. Check that box 7 times. That box has been checked. And I'm starting to talk a little bit about, you got to know what boxes you're trying to check. Yeah. You got to know what boxes you're trying to check, or otherwise you'll always be kind of rudderless. So yeah, I think that's my biggest success point, honestly, is that like I get deep joy off of watching people grow at a level that most other people don't. So when it comes time to make decisions about the business, a lot of my decisions come from a place of, I want to build the best and most fertile soil for the seeds that plant themselves at Sear to grow. And I don't want anything to get in the way of me building the best soil. Whereas somebody else could take those same seeds and drop them on other soil and they may not grow as much because the business has certain rules about how much profit margins need to be. The business has certain rules about an exit strategy. And by me not having all that, I can really focus on building the best soil. So like, that's the thing I think, if you can find real joy And watching people grow, I think what can come from that is this, right? And I didn't want all this. So that's what's really funny, Corey, is like, I have what people who spent years trying to build couldn't even get close to in an agency. And like, what did I focus on that they didn't? And what did they focus on that I didn't? I didn't focus on my P&L, right? I didn't. Unfortunately, I didn't focus on my P&L at times. I focused on doing things. I focused on changing the industry, trying to do something that really had a UVP. I didn't want to just be another company doing something that clients came to because company X was full of work and they couldn't take on any more work. I always wanted to be at that level, right? And then I just deeply cared about watching people grow. And I never had pressure to grow. So then it's always been like, oh shit, I fucked around as a teacher and grew a business that's got 200 people and is valued at 35, 40 million bucks. But I never woke up one day being like, you know what I want? I want to be a $10 million company. You know what I want? I want to be in this many countries. You know what I want? I'm like, man, no, I never wanted that. I just wanted to be a great place for clients to come and get services from and a great place for people to grow and learn. And that's been it.
I love it. Josh, you got anything else before we wrap it up?
No, I know that Corey and Curtis and I are going to have like another meeting about this and be like, all right, so what are we going to change based on what Wil said today? So
I'm always here to help. I'm always here to clarify things. I like the things that we talked about today, though, guys, because you guys got to a root that most people who want to talk about where Seer is never get to, right? And then they're like, oh, well, he did this, and you're like, well, it's a root that led to that. Like it's the roots, it's the stuff below the tree that is why the tree is what the tree is. But everybody wants to talk about the fruit on the tree and not the roots. And today you guys got to the roots. Like, I'm like, okay, grow up like I did. Like, maybe if your parents grew up with a bunch of money, it's harder for you to be motivated because you always had some cool shit, right? Like my kids eat strawberries every day. I got strawberries when we got lucky or when there were some old strawberries that were on the roadside that my dad could pick up on his way from work. Right? My dad bought the day old pretzels from work. Like my kids are never going to have that, which means there's probably no amount of being around me that my kids couldn't make this. It's one of the saddest realities that I've had, Corey, is my kids will never be able to do what I've done because what I built came from a life that they never have seen and they will never see. And it was the life and the roots that I lived that led to me building this, right? It was that drive to make my mom proud. Right? Like, and watching what she went through to keep a stable life for me so I could go to private schools. Like she put that on her back. My kids go to private schools 4 times, 10 times the amount of the private school I went to. But I saw a mom who was like, I'm dealing with all this guy's shit right now. So my kids can have a better chance with a better education. Because if I don't, they're going to be back in a bad school district and blah, 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 blah. Like that's hard to kind of say, like, that's how I run. You know what I'm saying? When people want to talk about entrepreneurship, it's hard to be like, well, what did you do in the business? You're like, nobody's gotten to the roots. I've done thousands of interviews. Nobody's gotten to the roots the way that you guys did here. So thanks for giving me that platform. I appreciate you guys for it.
Well, thank you, man.
Thank you.
We're gonna have to talk to you again. We'll reach out at some point because there's so much more where that came from, and I appreciate that because that's the goal. Like I said, we want to talk about the human experience, not just the hey, let's talk about all the fruit from that tree, right? But how did it get planted?
Right? And sometimes that fruit is rotten. I mean, the things that I'm really proud of is that like my kids still see me. My wife sees me all the time. My kids come with me on my trips when I got to speak at these conferences and shit. A lot of people have got successful businesses and fucked up lives. Look at Tony Hsieh.
Yeah.
This dude sold his business to Amazon for billions of dollars or whatever he did, could do all the things he wanted to do, and he got on a drug habit and then like playing around with fire through some crazy shit looking for meaning.
Yeah.
And died. Right? But what do we see? We see the fruit. Somewhere in those roots, there's something really that was missing. But you know how hard that's got to be as an entrepreneur when like what you probably really want to talk about is the roots, because that's the real shit about where you got to. But everybody wants to congratulate you for the pretty little fruit that's on your tree. And you're like, well, that's not actually my real life. Right? Like my wife hates me. I'm going through a divorce. My kids don't see me anymore. Right? Like that's the shit that weighs on you, but the whole world is out there telling you you're crushing it. Right? So yeah, man, I'm so appreciative of you guys taking the route that you did here because it really hits on shit that I've never talked to anybody about, but it's what's produced the fruit that we now know as Seer Interactive.
I just feel privileged to be part of it, Wil. Thank you so much for sharing these thoughts with us.
If there's anything we can do, let me know.
It's good to talk to you guys.
You're the man. Thank you so much, man. We'll be in touch. I'll let you know as soon as this goes live.
Please do. Have a good
Thanks,
one,
Will.
guys.
We'll see you.
See
You
ya.
too. Bye.
See ya.
Hello, it's Corey here, and I just want to thank you so much for listening into the Hope Strategy Podcast. I hope you're enjoying it as much as we are enjoying having these amazing conversations with these incredible individuals talking about hope. We'd love it if you wouldn't mind liking, subscribing, and leaving us a review on iTunes or Spotify or anywhere that you listen to your podcasts, and share it with anybody you feel that can benefit from these messages of hope. Thank you so much for listening to the Hope Strategy Podcast.